Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest show here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Now, following our 3-2 defeat against Spurs at Dean Court, where we was 2-0 up, playing fantastically well, we travelled to Elland Road to face a Leeds side who have just beaten Liverpool. Yeah, that side that we got beat 9-0 against. Yeah, we know. Before I welcome on my special guest, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. So Leeds started very, very well this season and recently got first win in quite some time against Liverpool. It is a pleasure to welcome onto the show from the Square Ball fanzine, Dan. Afternoon, Dan. How are you, mate?
I'm very, very good, Craig. Nice to see you.
Yep, and good to see you as well. And thank you so much for coming on this show. The Square Ball is a fantastic fanzine, YouTube channel, and podcast as well. So I much appreciate you coming on today. Let's start off by talking about the most recent game for Leeds, which was that win up at Liverpool, something that we couldn't do. We got thrashed 9-0 there. But what did you make of it?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? We were talking about this on a show we've just recorded prior to me speaking to you, and we're just saying it's strange how Leeds have become so enigmatic this season. And I'd kind of said tongue in cheek in the run up to that game, this will be the game that we win because we'd lost to Fulham and like 4 on the bounce prior to the Liverpool game. So it's actually hard to know exactly where this season's heading because I was more relaxed about the Liverpool game than I was about the Fulham game prior to that and this one coming up this weekend. But a brilliant day if you take it in isolation and divorce it from the rest of the season. It's great, man. I don't know if you've kind of followed what Leeds have been doing this season, but essentially we've played really, really well against teams we shouldn't play well against, the so-called Big Six. Like we beat Chelsea, we turned it on against Arsenal, beat Liverpool, but then we struggled against Fulham and then Villa. Basically, teams who come and play like what the cool kids call a low block these days, sit deep on the edge of the area, because all our football, it's this Red Bull style of football where it all gets funneled through the middle towards the D in the penalty spot. So teams that come and sit deep and narrow on the edge of their box, we've really, really struggled with. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what Bournemouth do because I've kind of read mixed reports of whether Bournemouth will come to attack or will sit deep.
I think based on what we have been doing, it could be a mixture of the two. So we have been very attacking at times against Fulham. We saw that, but we do seem to try and defend the lead once we get ahead as well. And I think that was probably our undoing against Spurs. The season for Leeds started very, very well. You got 2 wins out of the first 3, including that result against Chelsea at Elland Road. You beat Wolves on the opening day and drew with that lot down the M27, as we refer to them as. But it could have been 3 out of 3, considering what had happened the previous season. Did you think that something special was happening at that point?
Not necessarily something special. I think we're at a strange stage of our evolution now where Marcelo Bielsa was such a dominant force and character in Leeds United's identity over the last 3 or 4 years. And then he obviously got sacked in February. So it would be, is it still this year? God, it feels like it's gone on forever.
Yeah.
And then Jesse Marsch came in, and he was sort of firefighting for the last 12 games, but the football was, broadly speaking, awful. It really, really wasn't fun to watch. But we stayed up by the skin of our teeth. So everyone took that as a kind of a watershed moment that we get into this season, and then we'd see what Jesse Marsch was made of. So we started off by beating Wolves, like you say, the first game of the season. But then that Southampton game, again, out of the blocks, but then just crumbled in the second half, and strange substitutions, and just or a lack of substitutions. There was a lack of action at a time when it felt like the game needed changing, because I think Southampton either changed personnel or changed tactics, and we just had no response. And if you remember that day, that was the weekend where it was like the hottest weekend ever or something like
Yes.
that. The temperature's absolutely through the roof. And he didn't make subs early enough, and players were clearly flagging. So people were a little bit confused, albeit they saw the coming out of the blocks and doing really, really well against Southampton. We should have won that game, really.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you say you built on it against Chelsea, but then we've gone on this kind of strange run since then where we've been brilliant at times and not scored. And then when we don't score, it starts to get antsy. And we started really well against Crystal Palace, for example. And then because we didn't hold on to the lead, they came back into it. Second half just sort of went to something like approaching a basic 4-4-2, I guess, and started bypassing our pressing, just literally lifting it over us. We could all see it happening, and nothing happened to change it. So it's been a real mixed bag. Really, really brilliant high points where the intense pressing works, but then others where we look like we don't have a clue. So it's honestly, it's difficult to know what to expect from Leeds this weekend or any weekend until it feels like we need a bigger data set, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Marcelo Bielsa, let's just go back in time. Did wonders. He got Leeds back into the Premier League, and did a fantastic job. In the first season. What did Leeds fans think when he was sacked? Do they feel it was the right time, or would a lot of them wanted to Marcelo Bielsa to carry on?
It's really, really tough, and it's hard to answer in a way that's relatable until you've had Bielsa as your boss.
Yeah.
He's such a unique character. You learn so little about him as a man, but his football absolutely spoke volumes, and everyone was heartbroken when he was sacked. And it was really confusing for people. People couldn't sort of divorce the results from the man. It was just a very, very complicated time. Like, we were clearly getting tonked every week, albeit we lost like 6 to Liverpool, 4 to Spurs. But even in that game against Spurs, his final game, when we lost 4-0 at Elland Road, and you could see the thing had sort of broken down a little bit, we still created, I think it was like either 13, 14, 15 chances or something like that. And that was the way that it was with Bielsa. So he's such an enigmatic figure. The football was absolutely brilliant to watch. Even when it stopped working, it was fun to watch. And he transcended football. I mean, you'll know as a smaller club that's in the Premier League how hard it is to get a foothold in the Premier League, and Bournemouth did it really, really well for years. And it's kind of the journey that we're on now. And he brought us up when we finished 9th, and I think maybe it lulled the club into a false sense of security a little bit, thinking this is a bit easier than maybe we thought, and they didn't bring in the relevant, squad evolution didn't happen and all that sort of thing. The transfers weren't quite good enough, or we just didn't have enough money, because it's hard to catch up, really, isn't it? With the money that's in the Premier League. So, but Bielsa he transcended it all, because he's such an honest man. He's such an authentic man, sticks to his principles, that I think we felt insulated from the worst vices of the Premier League. Like, you see like Villa changing managers every 3, 4, 5, 6 months or something like that. And we felt insured against that with Bielsa. Then suddenly it kind of went wrong and fell apart. So even the people who could see it falling apart didn't want him to go. And we recorded a show, like we have voice notes sent into us, and we put out a show of people just crying when he left, which sounds melodramatic to football fans, and we'll say that's just crazy. But he genuinely affected so many people from a human perspective. And like, there's the famous story of picking up litter. He made the squad go around Thorpe Arch, the training ground, picking up litter, so they understood how the common man or woman, how long they had to work for like 3 hours, I think it was, to buy an average price match ticket. So it was about the players understanding what it was to be a fan. It's things like that. So it runs so much deeper. And I know that Bielsa will be held in amazing regard for many, many decades to come, regardless of where Leeds go from here. He's a very, very unique and special man.
Was you surprised that he actually joined Leeds in the first place? Because of course he did manage Argentina in the 2002 World Cup as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah, completely crazy when you go back and look at it, that we were out of the top tier, that this guy who had been on the world stage, he'd been to World Cups,
Mhm.
would come and do this. But then the more you get to know about him, and the more you understand the clubs that he chooses, he kind of likes clubs with strong identities, maybe that have been underperforming, things like that. Look at his time at Bilbao with the restrictions that
Yeah.
Bilbao have as well in terms of the geography of the players that are allowed to play for Bilbao. So it's almost like he seems to thrive under working under restrictions. Like, because I mean, there were loads of times when he was rumored with we were playing this entertaining football, and then Man United might have changed managers or whatever, and people are saying, "Get him in at Old Trafford. We need Bielsa." I think he'd never go there. He'd never work under that sort of setup at a club like that. I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, all biases aside, it's an appealing job for most international managers. But somehow with Bielsa, you always just trusted that he would never do it. He wouldn't down tools and go to one of your rivals, because he was a man of such deep principles. So I say the more you read into his background, the more you get to know him, the more you can see why he took it. Because Leeds were this sleeping giant, and he pulled us up by the bootstraps. It was amazing. It was an amazing 3 years.
And of course, he also brought on, and his number two at the time, I believe, was Carlos Corberan. And, he actually helped Carlos Corberan become a manager that he is today. Um, did a really, really good job at Huddersfield. Um, what was your memories of Carlos and what he brought alongside Marcelo?
Well, Corberan was there, I think, before Bielsa, which is one of the interesting things, because when you get Bielsa, he tends to bring the whole lot in, and when he leaves, the whole lot leave, and they all just kind of go off around the world and do their own thing. And then when he gets the next job, they all down tools and do it all again. But Corberan was already there. I don't know if he was appointed by Victor Orta, who's our sporting director, but and maybe it was a Spanish speaking thing or whatever it might have been, but he showed enough to Bielsa that he was kept on. But Corberan was managing our under 23s, as they were at the time, 21s now,
Yeah.
but then was sort of folded into the first team as well. But you never really heard much from him. I don't know much about him. I've learned more about Corberan since he's left Leeds
Mhm.
than when he was here. So I'm not too sure, is the honest answer.
Let's talk about, of course, the in between the seasons. So, of course, you stayed up last season, and I guess it was a bit edgy at times, wasn't it? But you
Just a
managed to,
bit.
yeah, you managed to get over the line. What was that final day like? Firstly,
It was strange. It was my dad's birthday. Was that day. So my dad lives over on the East Coast, and it takes a couple of hours to get over to the East Coast from West Yorkshire. So I wasn't at the game, but we do after match broadcasts and things like that. So I was over, and we arranged to have Sunday. My dad just went to have Sunday dinner for his birthday. It was like 70th birthday as well, so it's not one we
yeah,
could rearrange or dodge. So we went over in the morning, and then timed it so we were driving back during the first half, and then I got back to the studio here to watch the second half. Funnily enough, I ended up sitting in the car park. I couldn't face watching it with anybody else, so I had the Sky app on my phone when I got to the car park, and just sat there on my own until
yeah.
full time, watching it in the car park with the other lads who were in the studio, watching it on the TV. It was a very unique experience, but the stress levels had just got so high across the course of the season, um, that it was just a huge release. It was magic, but one of those things where you think, "Oh God, I don't ever want to do that again." But the stuff started happening across the course of the game when I was driving back from the East Coast back towards Leeds.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a point at which we stopped at a service station because having kids in the car, they need the loo, that kind of thing. So I nipped in to use the loo, and then I think Newcastle had scored at Burnley as I was in the loo, and then I came out and Leeds had scored, but then had a goal. That goal was disallowed by VAR. So it was chaos, but in the most fun way possible. But it's one of those that can go either way, can't it? Because everybody went into that game expecting us to go down that day, and we didn't. We managed to pull it off.
Yeah, I bet it was a massive relief at full time and just like that you'd done it, and of course sent Burnley down. But you'd managed to keep your place in the Premier League.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny, isn't it? I mean, I can't honestly say, hand on heart, I'm particularly enjoying being one of the also rans in the Premier League. I think the gap between the
Mhm.
top teams, the so-called Big Six, the finances involved in that with the teams who occupy the other 14 places, it's not much fun, is it? You don't win very often.
No.
And I go back to being, like growing up watching Leeds in like the 90s when we first came back up after we came to Bournemouth, and it was a lot narrower then. And even through the 90s, the gap between top and mid-table was narrower. It was easier to break into that group. And I think it's just become more and more polarized. So if you look at it, to stay up, you've got to win what? 9 games, 10 at a push. So you win once a month, and that's it. That's the sum total of your enjoyment in the Premier League. And it's all in a bid to just stay there for another year so you can get another lot of TV money. So when you start to break it down into those terms, I think it can be a bit soul destroying. But then again, I go back to Anfield last week, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I bet. That's something that we can only dream of at this moment in time. Unfortunately, hopefully next season, but not this year. We've got a 9-0 thrashing instead.
Yeah.
But Calvin Phillips, of course, moved on during the summer. How pivotal was he to Leeds? And of course, he's had an injury at Man City. Recently had an operation, as you mentioned. But how far do you think he can go, and what do you think he can bring to that City side?
It's interesting, isn't it? He was essential to Bielsa's side, because Bielsa used to play a 4-1-4-1, and Phillips was in there essentially as the quarterback there, the deep line midfielder. And his job was to obviously win the ball back, tidy up. He would maybe go over to the fullback position when the fullback pushed forward. Very, very crucial. And he would spraying passes out to the wings. It was all about making the pitch as big as possible under Bielsa. And then after Bielsa went and Calvin Phillips was injured last season as well, he came back into Jesse Marsch's side, and it just didn't seem to work for him. He didn't seem to have a proper place in that. So Marsch this season has got us set up with 2 central midfielders sitting a bit deeper. Maybe not as deep as Calvin was. But as I was saying, the Red Bull style of football is all through the middle. It's quick vertical passing through the lines, which didn't suit Calvin Phillips' game. So he looked a little bit lost when he came back, to be honest. We were trying to patch him up just to try and get us over the line, which ultimately we managed to do. But I think there was a general feeling that he was going to leave. There was an inevitability about it. And a lot of people, I think, thought he was going to go to Man City. So when it came through and it was confirmed, didn't come as a massive surprise. And he's left with everybody's best wishes, I think. But again, no surprise to see him injured again at City. He's hurt his shoulder, which he did. It was just in the run up to the Euros, that was last summer 21, wasn't it? And he did. It was like a nothing tackle towards the end of a dead rubber game. I think it might have been against West Brom at Elland Road when crowds were allowed back in.
Yeah.
And he just jumped into a tackle about 3 minutes from the end and did his shoulder then. And he was touch and go for the Euros. And I think they managed him through that so he could play in the Euros. But it's had the knock-on effect of him still carrying this injury through to Man City. And now perhaps he's, in jeopardy of missing, well, he's in danger of missing the World Cup rather.
And one of the midfielders who has done a really good job, and there's a brilliant article on the Square Ball posted, I believe, only today, is Tyler Adams. What's he been like?
Yeah, he's excellent. So we got Tyler Adams from RB Leipzig, so he's familiar with the Red Bull style of football, American international. The Americans, we've sort of picked up quite a lot of American viewers and listeners in the wake of this because of Marsch and Aronson and Adams as well. He's probably the least famous of the Americans that are currently, I think, playing the trade in the Premier League. Like Pulisic, I think at Chelsea is the poster boy. Aronson is quickly getting there, but Tyler Adams is it's not as sexy, is it, being a deep line midfielder and just breaking things up? He's what it was Cantona who called Didier Deschamps a water carrier, wasn't it? And for want of a better phrase, that's what he does. He just goes in there, tidies everything up, does the dirty work. Isn't shy of a confrontation, as we saw at Anfield when I think not David Robertson, what's his name, Andy Robertson. He kicked the ball at Aronson on the floor. First one over was Tyler Adams getting involved and defending his pal. So yeah, he's great. He's absolutely covers loads of ground. He's aggressive, gets up in people's faces. He's a really, really, really tidy player, I think, and one of those that the fan of any football club likes a player who mixes it up in midfield.
And one of your strikers, Rodrigo, has been. There was a lot of speculation about him, but he stayed at Leeds and again has done very, very well.
He's confusing, is Rodrigo. He's been here for sort of 2 or 3 years now, and nobody knows where he fits. He's sort of he's a number 9.5, and he doesn't seem to have the engine to be able to do the work that like a number 9. Like you look at what Bamford does, the running that he does and did in Bielsa's side, absolutely tearing it up all the time. But Rodrigo doesn't seem to have the same engine on him, and it's the same with Marsch. We do a lot of running under Marsch, a lot of pressing from the front. It's different pressing, triggers are different and all that, but again, doesn't seem to have the legs for it, and it doesn't quite make sense to me why we signed him when we did. Because what Leeds have been trying to do is buy people with potential resale value, or that are going to increase in value as they go, even if we don't sell them. And yet we bought him for 27, 28 million at age 29. And he doesn't quite seem to fit the style. So I'd be interested to know exactly how and why that happened. That said, he's a really good, intelligent footballer, but sometimes it's like he's in his own head. Like he'll take a really easy pass and just lay it off to the opposition or put it out into touch. And you think, what are you doing that for? But then at other times, like he seems to have this telepathic understanding with Rafinha when Rafinha was here. So it's hard to figure him out. Maybe this is just what you get around mid-table in the Premier League. Sometimes they're brilliant, sometimes they're awful, rather than just being mediocre all the time. Yeah, but he scored a few goals this season as Rodrigo, despite not being all that. You wouldn't think looking at him. He's a funny one. You'll see this on Saturday. I sort of expect him to play on Saturday. He'll start, and it'll be interesting to see what we get from him, whether we get a performance, because he might well score, but he also might well look a bit like slack in possession too.
One player as well you've had throughout the championship years as well is Luke Ayling. Of course, we know a little bit about Luke Ayling from his time at Yeovil as well. But he's really stepped up. He's really proved that he's a Premier League player.
Yeah, I think we're coming towards the end of the life cycle of the players who got as promoted from a couple of years back, I think now, and sadly Luke Ayling is probably in that group. And that we've got Rasmus Christiansen in now, who's Danish international right back, who I think will probably start. He struggled a little bit as he's come in. The step up from Salzburg, playing over there in Austria, to the Premier League, you noticed it in him. He was sort of second guessing himself, lacking a bit of confidence, but he's slowly kind of emerging now and showing that he's a decent player. And he seems to be in ahead of Ayling. But Ayling's loved by the Leeds fans because he's that sort of cheeky, chappy type footballer. He's a dead nice guy, dead affable. He's got a stammer as well, which he's overcome, and he still puts himself up to do media duties and things like that. So he just seems like an all round nice guy. So many of them did as well. Like Matthias Klick likes a little bit of mischief. He'll get involved in the mischief, and Liam Cooper. All these players, they're all thought of very fondly because they helped to get us up. And Luke Ayling's one of the cornerstones of that. So. Yeah, it does feel like they're all because they're all north of 30 now. We're in the process of looking to replace them and just evolving the squad, which is sad, really, isn't it? Because you kind of want to cling on to the memory of promotion forever, and he's part of that.
And I think that's what we found as well, because we had a squad that got us from League One. The likes of Simon Francis, Steve Cook, we could put Fraser in there as well. All these players that helped us, Charlie Daniels, that helped us get into the Premier League. And I think we kind of lost our identity towards the end of that fifth season in the Premier League, the season where we went down. Of course, COVID had a part to play, but because these players were slowly being phased out, not because they'd done anything wrong, but mainly because of age. But Klisch still, he's been ever present, hasn't he?
No, well, he's been coming off the bench a lot more, so he's featured in most games, but he's now become more peripheral. I think it looked towards the back end of the window like he was going to go, to be honest. But he's spoken to Marsch, and it seems like they've found him a place within that squad, and he knows what his role's going to be, which seems to be sort of super sub now. So yeah, he's moving towards the periphery a little bit. And there's a photo that was sent out on Instagram of the players in the dressing room. This thing that Newcastle have been doing a few times. So get a good win, photograph that goes on Instagram in the dressing room, and you can see all those players like Cooper, Ayling, Klick are all just on the periphery in the physical sense of it. And you wonder if that's like a representation of where this is heading, because what you were saying there about the fifth season back up, it's that need to evolve the squad, isn't it? Like, how do you do it in a way that's sympathetic, that the fans are going to like and going to buy into, and how good are the replacements as well for the money? It's a tough gig, isn't it, trying to replace them, and you don't want to.
Well, the only one from that promotion back in 2015 still left is Adam Smith, and he's still getting his game. But eventually, I think he's going to come to a point where we're going to look at, and to be fair, Eddie Howe did look at Jack Stacey, for example, as a possible replacement for Adam Smith, but Adam Smith has managed to keep his place. But it's gutting when these players do come to the end. But one player that did score, of course, and he scored the winner against Liverpool, was Somerville. And I'm going to struggle to say his first name. I don't know how
Jimmy, just
you
call
say
him Jimmy. Call him Jimmy.
Jimmy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he
Crescenzio
looked
it is.
Crescenzio.
Yeah.
He looks promising.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's been one of these players. I mean, like Victor Orta, our sporting director, has come under a lot of criticism for some of the first team recruitment, like Junior Firpo signed from Barcelona. Not good. We've spent a lot of money on Dan James, who's now out on loan at Fulham. One thing he's done really well is shape the under 23s, and we picked Somerville up for about £1 million and a half from a Dutch team, and he's just spent a couple of years being in the 23s, but absolutely tearing it up in that league. He looks too good for that division, for the 23s, but he hadn't quite made the step up. When we were talking on our show a little bit earlier that we recorded, saying it looked a little bit like his breakout performance at Anfield, like he's finally found his shooting boots and his form that he's brought from the 23s into the first team. But he's taken the number 10 shirt. That's another thing. Like Rafinha had it last year, and I mean that's a big balls move, isn't it? To take a number 10 shirt when you're just coming around for 21. And he spoke to I think he spoke to the manager and maybe Victor Orta as well, and said, would you be, and the senior players, would you be all right if I took one of the more prominent squad numbers? And they said, well, yeah, if you feel like you can carry the weight of it, because it was originally in for the number 7 shirt, but Aronson's taken that, so he's taken number 10 instead. It's a heavy shirt to wear, isn't it? Is number 10. It shows a lot about his confidence. So we just need him now to do it more often and more consistently. But he looked really, really bright against Liverpool, I thought. Yeah.
I'll be honest, at the start of the season, I was fearing for Leeds, and the main reason being
I still am.
Jesse was Jesse Marsch. But when you look at the job he's done, he hasn't spent ridiculous amounts of money. He's not, gone over and above, what Leeds can afford, but he's bought sensibly. And do Leeds fans starting to warm to him, or do they still think they could find somebody better?
I think it genuinely is a watch this space thing at the minute. We're not sure is the honest. If you had to throw a blanket over it, you'd have to say to be decided. We're not sure as a whole. Some people like him, some people don't. There's a lot of people somewhere in the middle, the undecideds. Personally, I'm somewhere on the undecideds. I have my reservations about the Red Bull style of football being effective in the Premier League. In that it seems to be effective against teams like Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, but we're struggling with other teams that don't play in the same way. So it's a problem for Marsch to solve. If he can solve that problem, I think people will definitely warm to him more. I think he probably said a bit too much at the start as well, because he's got a big personality. He's got a big sort of American confidence about him. Yeah. Following on from a man who said nothing in Bielsa. So the contrast was really stark. And Leeds and Bielsa got fined quite a lot for not fulfilling the rights holder duties. So people may not be aware, but you have to do certain media things, like a number of interviews for all the rights holders, be it Middle East, USA, whatever, lots of Premier League. It's what funds the Premier League, isn't it? All the TV coverage. Yeah. So they have to do 6-7 interviews a week or whatever. And he did none of them. he kept saying, no, what will I have to pay to make this go away kind of thing? And he kept paying the fines. So the contrast there is really, really stark. And I think Marsch did a lot of stuff at the start, did a lot of podcasts, extended interviews, said a lot, when he might have been better served just keeping his head down and letting the results do the talking, because he kept us up, and that was maybe the time to talk. So that rubbed people up the wrong way a little bit. And he's continued it a little bit into the start of this season, but he's gradually seems to be pulling back from it now, because he got sent off down at Brentford. So he's realised that you can't go mouthing off to the officials. So just reining him in a little bit and just calming it all down, and let us concentrate less on what's being said and just look at the field and the results and the football. Because he needs to be judged on his football, because sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not. So I guess we'll see. Would I be surprised if he lost on Saturday and didn't make it through the World Cup break? No. Would I be surprised if he made it to the end of the season and we finished mid-table? Also no. So I don't really know at this stage.
But Leeds are one of those clubs where you've had some historic managers throughout the years, haven't you? You've had the Don Revis, you've had Brian Clough there. There's many more that I could name. Howard Kendall. But
Wilkinson, you mean?
Howard Wilkinson. Yes, sorry. Howard Wilkinson. Yep. So
It's all right. I called you Steve off air before this, so don't worry about that.
I'll be forgiven. Howard Kendall was
Yeah.
at Everton, wasn't
Everton,
he?
yeah, yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I always get those two mixed up. But the managers that you've had, Jesse Marsch just doesn't seem to fit into
No,
those big names.
no, he's a different style of manager, and that's the thing. That's what you realise, and I think that's been jarring for people a little bit, and it will take some getting used to. Like I say, that we've not really seen an American in the Premier League, have we, before? And the
No,
timing of it around Ted Lasso is probably unfortunate. And I don't know if anybody else noticed it, but we did at Leeds. So Andrea Radrizzani, I think, he views it a little bit like a TED Talk owning a football club.
mm,
He wants to be a bit of a disruptor, and you get the sense he might like motivational slogans. And over the front of the tunnel, they used to have "Believe" on the front of
yeah,
the tunnel at Elland Road, and then Marsh was appointed, and I think somebody must have said to him, "Look, they said that in the dressing room in Ted Lasso. If you want to avoid those comparisons, let's take that down. Let's change it." And it was for Marsh's first game, the Believe had gone, and it had just been changed to like Leeds United or something like that. So yeah, he's up against that, isn't he, to a
yeah,
certain extent? But as with all these things, it's always going to be judged on the football. It's always going to go back to the football, regardless of what your personality is like. Like, you go back to Brian Clough, he was an acerbic character, wasn't he? And went on to do great
exactly.
things for Forest, not so great things for Leeds. If you can get them playing, people will love you.
Of course, Bournemouth and Leeds have had many memorable matches throughout the years, and um, there was one in 1990 which we ended up going down. Leeds went up, and then a couple of years later, I believe it was 2 years later, then you won the league.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in Bournemouth in 1990, albeit I was 11, just turning 12. So I don't have many
Mm,
memories of it anymore. But obviously, I know the stories of it and all the coverage that happened at the time. And, there are, it's not something we look back on proudly at all, I don't think. You know, I think we accept that Leeds fans have got a reputation for it. I'm trying to choose my words carefully because I'm not trying to chuck Leeds fans under the bus for this, because I am a Leeds fan. I'm one of the people I'm talking about. But it wasn't good, was it? It all went wild. But because we went up, it's looked back on with a certain fondness as well. It's really difficult to
yeah.
reconcile like the two sides of it. I mean, we stayed in a hotel in Bournemouth, and for anybody who's old enough to remember, the town was basically shut down that
Mm,
Saturday night because of all the disorder. And we were staying in a hotel, and there was a wedding in it. It was two Bournemouth fans getting married, and they invited all the Leeds fans, all of us who were staying in the hotel, just down to the wedding reception, even though we just relegated the club and the town was getting destroyed. And they just said, "Yeah, because you can't get a drink anywhere else, come and use our bar. You're absolutely fine." And it was a lovely evening from what I remember and what my parents have told me about it. So there are little pockets of humanity in there, but no, it's not exactly the proudest episode in our history, not at all. But again, the, why put Leeds in Bournemouth on a bank holiday weekend with what was likely to be at stake? It makes no sense. But then again, I guess that brings us on to this season, doesn't it?
it does, and of course, there was a tweet that was made some time ago. I won't name who it was by or which organisation it was, but it was put straight to the police and asking for the game to be moved, which of course got quite some negative responses at the time. But it is 32 years ago now. And, I think it was completely the wrong thing to do, considering how long ago it is. And a lot of Leeds fans who are going to the games, week in, week out, might not remember that game.
Yeah, it's it's a tough one, isn't it? I understand the reservations, but I know the tweet that you mean and the organisation that sent it out. And my immediate reaction was, well, that's melodramatic, and that's me trying to put aside my tribalism
Yeah,
here. I thought that's melodramatic. It was a long time ago.
yeah,
Leeds fans have a reputation because Leeds fans did a lot of stuff. Um, but do we carry that on perpetually? Does it mean that Leeds and Bournemouth can never play again on a weekend? Because there was a time in the Football League when we played each other, it was always midweek, wasn't it?
yeah.
For this very reason. Um, I guess it's one of those suck it and see things, isn't it? You've got to give it a chance and see what happens. And you've got to remember as well, the circumstances of 1990 can't be discounted from this, in
Mhm,
that it was a promotion relegation issue.
yeah,
Um, and the length of time that we've been out of the division, out of the top division, sorry, was 8 years at that point, which felt like a lifetime after being so good during the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
So my dad tells me. So there was a lot riding on it, whereas you would think at worst it's going to be one of the two of us, if not both of us, trying to avoid relegation. So I don't know. Policing's different now, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
And the way that, the number of people allowed to go into Premier League grounds as away fans is different. I don't know. It feels like a different era. Like I said, I was 11 or 12 then. I'm 44 now. I'm
I
certainly
was
obviously certainly
5.
certainly not the same person that I was back then. I can assure you. So
Yeah.
it's a difficult one, isn't it? I understand why people are wary of it, but
Mhm.
until it's given a chance, how are you going to know what it's going to be like?
I think the tweet just blew it all out of proportion. And to be fair, I think the clubs and the Premier League would have sorted it out themselves. And I felt sorry for Leeds fans because they've been tarred with this brush for something that they haven't done.
Well, I mean, I understand it. Like it's complex, isn't it? It's nuanced.
Yeah.
That we're not Leeds fans are not angels by any stretch of the
Mhm.
imagination. Plenty of things that have happened in the past with Leeds fans um, to inform that view. But I'm also equally very, very defensive of Leeds fans as well, and that I agree that we all shouldn't be tarred with the same brush. And there are people at every club who um, have caused disorder at one time or another. I don't know. It's tough, isn't it? It's just tough to unpick it all, and I don't want to try and distill it down into one or two sentences and misrepresent how I feel about it because it's complex to me as well because I
Yeah.
was there. But I've got great memories of going up that weekend, and I was on the pitch at Dean Court on my dad's shoulders, crying because we got promoted. So it's a brilliant, happy memory for me. But I
Mhm.
accept that it's not going to be a happy memory for the residents of Bournemouth who still remember it, you know,
Yeah.
all these years later. So maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe it's just about a bit of sensible compromise. I don't know.
I think it's a case now because it is 32 years ago, just to draw that line and just move on. Because the Leeds fans now are very much different to the ones back then. But with regards to the Bournemouth side, is there anybody in particular that you are worried about in in the Bournemouth setup?
No, we were chatting on our show before this, saying like we tend to look for grievances with players.
Mhm.
Like Kiefer Moore seems to be a player we should have some sort of previous grievance with. Maybe going back to the EFL, but it doesn't look like we've really crossed over. The one actually we're genuinely interested in is Lewis Cook,
Yeah.
um, because he was one of our great white hopes for a long time and was sold when everything went belly up for us because we needed to keep the club afloat. You know how it goes in the EFL, and he always was held up as one he had unfulfilled potential for us. He was touted as future England player when he was at Leeds. So I'm interested to know what he's going to be like if he plays and what he's been getting on like as well.
Would you say Leeds fans nowadays are feel because you had that slide down the divisions, and I remember, and this is going back to I believe it was 2008. Leeds were knocked out of the FA Cup by Histon,
Yeah.
which I'm not even sure what division the Histon's in anymore. But does that make you appreciate what Bielsa has done and what Marsh is trying to do?
Oh, 100%. I experienced the Bielsa era almost as a payoff for having gone through all that. It was
Yeah.
almost worth going through all that to witness what we witnessed with that. Say it's just like swashbuckling football, attacking.
Mhm.
Even when you 3 up, you still carry on attacking because it was attack is the best form of defense. So yeah, it was just a brilliant era was Bielsa. And yeah, it just feels like it feels like a different lifetime ago. Like I look back on, going to Carlisle, for example, playoff semi-final, and we lost the final to Doncaster.
Yeah.
Again, we're a Doncaster now. It's just that the different paths that we've taken across the years. It almost feels like it didn't happen. It's like a surreal chapter of history it's just it's just a chapter of history that does just it feels surreal. I don't know. I can't fully explain it. Again, and maybe it's something like there's something quite jarring about the gloss of the Premier League, um, it being on telly. Like every game's a broadcast game around the world, versus the obscurity of going somewhere like Histon. I mean, it was televised at the time, but going to Exeter and we lost at Exeter. I remember, and just
Yeah.
there were crushes outside the turnstiles and stuff. it's different worlds. It just we've occupied such a broad space over the course of the last 15, 20 years that maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's why it's hard to get your head around.
Of course, there was that Doncaster playoff final, as you mentioned there, and to be fair, we had him actually on the goal scorer of that goal, a certain James Hayter, and what was that day? We heard how great it was for James, but how was that day for Leeds fans, considering you're so much bigger club than Doncaster?
Well, yeah, it was strange. I think we had something like 55,000 fans inside Wembley. Like we obviously sold out our half of it, and then I think because Doncaster's relatively close, it's like an hour down the road. People were just going down to the Doncaster ticket office until they caught wind of it, and buying tickets there. And there was like this whole pocket of Leeds fans behind the goal. So it was obvious in the physical sense the difference in size between the two clubs, and Doncaster much more sort of a family club, a smaller town club, and then we were there with all our songs, and we just didn't turn up. We just did not turn up on the day, but which is something every football fan can relate to, seeing your team not perform. But we've got habit for it. But that was my dad's birthday as well.
Yeah,
Funnily enough, yeah. Just we've got end of May birthdays, both me and my dad. And like we lost when I was 9. I turned 9 on the day we
yeah,
lost the playoff final in 1987. So we've seen a few disappointments over the years. So it was horrible. I mean, we set off crack of dawn about 6 o'clock, something like that, and got down to London quite early. And we were just milling around. But I don't know. I've never found it a place where I've gone and been confident. The only time I've enjoyed being in a final or in a big stadium. I say it's not a final, but the Charity Shield in 1992, we beat Liverpool
yeah.
4-3, but there's nothing on it. It was just like a fun day out. Whereas I look at the Cardiff one that we went to a couple of years before Doncaster when we lost to Watford, which again ultimately meant we ended up in League One because we failed to go up, so the money dried up. Ended up in League One, and I don't know. I've never had a good association with Wembley or finals. It's just not a thing that Leeds seem to do. If we ever go up or perform, it has to be done like via the automatics.
Yeah. How do you think Jesse Marsch is going to set up against Bournemouth? Do you think he'll go with the same side that started against Liverpool, or do you think he'll mix it up a little?
I think the formation will be the same, barring any injuries.
Mhm.
It'll probably be the same. You can look at the same back four, the same two midfields, which will be Rocker and Adams. The question is about who starts up front. I think it'll probably be Rodrigo again because Bamford's just struggling to find his fitness and he can't find his form either. So Rodrigo will probably start. Bamford will probably come on for him after an hour. And then it's the players behind the three that took in behind the forward. Sinistera was injured against Liverpool, but he's been one of our brighter performers this season. So I expect him maybe to come back in. I think maybe Somerville stays in. I think Sinistera comes back in, maybe for Harrison, because he's been a little bit hit and miss this season, Harrison. And then Brendan Aronson will play as well. So I expect that to be the three. It might be Somerville, Aronson, Sinistera behind Rodrigo. Because we were debating this on our show just before I spoke to you, and we couldn't quite nail it down. But I think that's probably what will happen. Because one of the things he did, like we played really well against Arsenal the other week, even though we lost, was then he made a load of changes for the Leicester game midweek, which really, really backfired and we were terrible. So I think maybe he's learned that lesson, that carry the momentum through from the victory at Anfield and see where it gets you.
And the final part that I always ask all my guests to do this, Dan. Um, how do you think it's going to go?
Honestly, I do not know. I don't know. It depends how Bournemouth set up. It depends whether we're on our game. It depends. If we score early,
Yeah,
it'll boost the crowd. It might relax everybody a bit. But even then, when we've scored, sometimes we've then ended up on the back foot and not looked great. So honestly, I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you. I wouldn't be surprised with us winning, losing, or drawing. I'm leaning towards the more positive aspects of it because we beat Liverpool. But then that's what you naturally do, isn't it? You win a game and you think, oh, we'll win the next one. But for us, it's a big game, this one, in terms of the meaning of the outcome, because I think we need another win on the board going into the World Cup. And this is the one that I know the club and fans and club have been identifying. It was the Fulham game and the Bournemouth game where they expected us to pick stuff up points wise. So I think the expectation is that we should win. Whether we will depends which Leeds turns up, really.
to be honest, after the Spurs game at the weekend for Bournemouth, where we went 2-0 up, and then lost 3-2. Lucas Moura had, a big part to play in that, but I'm really not sure whether or not Gary O'Neill will go with Kiefer Moore up front alongside Solanke, or whether or not he'll go with what works so well earlier on, which is playing just Solanke up front on his own. So I'd like to think that we can get something out of the game. But the rule is try and draw your away games
Mm.
and win the home ones. So I'd be quite happy with a draw from Elland Road.
Yeah, I think
But
you may well set up to try and play balls in behind us. That's how you can hurt us.
yeah,
Is to turn the defense early. So whoever's good at getting on stuff, played in, like, on the half turn on the shoulder of the
mm,
centre halves, whether that's Moore or Solanke, it'll probably be that one.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Dan. Just before you go, I know that I did say a bit about the square ball at the start as well, and it's a fantastic fanzine. But in your own words, tell everybody how they can find you.
Yeah, if you want to see us, just have a look at the squareball.net is the website where we've got all the articles. We link to all the videos and stuff that we've got there, or just search on YouTube or any of the social platforms for the square ball. And please be nice.
Thank you so much for coming on, Dan, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And all the very best for the rest of the season. Like I always say, apart from Saturday.
Saturday,
Yeah.
yeah. Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much. Take care, Dan. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining me on this opposition preview show. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe, and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here. I'll up the cherries in all departments. Please do also let us know your thoughts in the comments, be it you're a Bournemouth fan or a Leeds fan. You're all welcome here. Also, please do check out our interview with James Hayter. We did mention him during this opposition preview show as well. We've had Harry Redknapp on here, Steve Fletcher, Steve Cook, Sean Teal, Vince Bartram. We've also had Carlton Palmer for you Leeds fans as well. You'll probably remember him. Also, this Saturday, we are doing our first watch along. So please do get involved, be it a Bournemouth fan, a Leeds fan, or just a general football fan. We will be flashing your comments up on the screen as well. But until the next show, up the cherries, and thank you for joining us.